Morning, everyone. Boker Tov, good morning. I hope you had a very pleasant and joyful Shabbat. I did. Who here speaks Yiddish? Abyssal. Who here understands a little Yiddish? Okay. So that's more than me, but I know about 4 or 5 words. I know about 4 or 5 words, but the words that I know are really important. Some of them are really important because those are the words that my parents didn't want us to understand. Yiddish was their secret language. I think it's sort of the rule of survival when you have 5 children. You need a secret language. Some of those words are just unbelievably deep and important words to understand Jewish consciousness, to understand the way we think, to understand some of the ideas that motivate us. Today's lecture was formally entitled Jewish Values in the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict, the Jew in the World. In reality, today is going to be about the politics of Shanda versus the politics of Pasnisht. Okay. Now, who here knows what Pasnisht, what Shanda means? That's very interesting that you all know that term. And I'm going to argue that that's not an accident. Because Jews know very well the politics of Shanda. Now the issue I want to talk about today, and actually it's going to be the theme for the whole day, for also your other sessions this afternoon, is what are the key values that can or should motivate a Jewish political theory vis-a-vis the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. In particular, we're asking the following question. If, let's say, as of a few months ago, and we don't know if it's still that way, but let's say, the majority of Jews in Israel, and certainly the majority of Jews in North America, are for a 2-state solution, if it's possible, within the context of Israel's legitimate rights to live as a Jewish state with safe and defensible borders. That statement is about as parov and broad as you could make outside of a few small settlements somewhere. Most Jews, yeah, that sounds right. I didn't say we should do it. I didn't say we can do it. I said, and this is, by the way, Netanyahu's core policy. It's the core policy of the government of Israel, even though some parties, such as, for example, the National Religious Party, now called the Jewish Home, says, do you know what? I don't mind that you feel that way. I can sit in a government even though I don't feel that way, because your feeling that way has already stated a condition that will never be implemented, and therefore I don't have to lose any sleep. Because you yourself said that you're committed to a 2-state solution so long as it could coincide with the legitimate rights of a Jewish people to live as a Jewish state with clear and with defensible borders. You're not going to be able to do that. So even though I would never articulate that, because I believe that we shouldn't have a Palestinian state, so says the Jewish Home, but since you have a condition for its implementation, which I don't assume is going to happen anywhere within my political career, there's no reason why my political career and your political career in the present can't sit with each other. And that's the basis of the current coalition. Right? But we asked ourselves, our research team, our iEngage research team, and we're working on iEngage, the 3rd section of iEngage now, which deals with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And how do we talk about it? And how do we create space within the American Jewish community and also within Israel to talk about this? despite our political differences. We asked if the value is a two-state solution, or if rather the goal is a two-state solution, what values do we bring to the table to infuse our thinking? Like why? What are the Jewish and general values that guide our political theory? And again, I restate it over and again. Just assume that this is like somebody massaging you a little bit. Because I know for some people, every time I say something, like there could be a little jump, so I'm just saying, shh, still. It's another Yiddish word that I know. Still, it's okay. I'm not arguing with you. I'm not delegitimizing anybody's political positions here. Quite to the contrary. What I'm trying to do is to create a language where Jews could actually respect each other and talk to each other despite our values, our political disagreements. That we could all aspire to hold on to certain core values which elevate our aspirations, all the while knowing that it's possible that in the present, life might be difficult. Now, the question that I want to ask is, I believe, one of the hardest questions and one that I have to massage you a lot on. Like, relax, don't worry, but come with me for a while. I want to ask the question, should they influence the way we think? I'll get there. I already hear, don't worry. Who's they? Is there a they? Is there a them? Is there a them who we should take into account when we think about our political theories? When we think about who we want to be? Now I'm going to get it now. Get ready, sit comfortably. If, and this is checked, if 99% of legal theorists in the world and scholars of international law believe that settlements are illegal, is that relevant data? Is it relevant data? Like, or if we find ourselves that we are quoting the one Australian person who we met, and there's an Israeli, we know somebody, and he says that it's not. And it all comes down to a fundamental argument on how you read the Geneva Accord, on what are the fundamental rules of how an occupying force is supposed to treat, whether it's occupying land or occupying people. Or what happens if you find yourself inclined to being one of the few people in the world who's giving a very emotional argument? There is no Palestinian people. No Palestinian people. And you might have lots of data. You could start piling it up. And if everybody looks at you and has some borderline double take, because they frankly don't know what you're talking about, and then they get even a little more, because aren't some people claiming that you're not a people? Or didn't they claim you're not? And like, you're now doing what? There is no Palestinian people. And you will show that in this accord and in this accord they were speaking about the Arab Israelis and they weren't talking about the Palestinians, and there wasn't a Palestinians, and the Palestinians only really became a people when copying Zion. Whatever, knock yourself out. You speak, and certainly when you speak in the context of certain Jewish audiences, you could feel really normal. But what happens when somebody is looking at you and they look at you and say, something's wrong? What happens when you hold a position, let's say, forget not just on settlements, on settlement expansions now, or in the context of a certain peace negotiation, or don't even call it a peace negotiation, that might be too value-laden, in a certain negotiation, leading to who knows what. You do A, B, and C. And when you speak to yourself, it's clear to you, of course I could do A, B, C, and D. But most people look at you and think that you're crazy. Think that you're wrong. Should that affect our thinking? My question is, how ought the world affect the way we Jews do politics? Now let's talk about why this is such a difficult question. See, when the world hates us, there's only one thing I'm worried about, and that is their power. What I'm not worried about is their opinion. And for 2,000 years, we weren't worried about their opinion because we didn't hold them in high moral regard. You are an immoral anti-Semitic creep. Nothing more and nothing less. If you actually don't like me, that's a pretty good symptom, that indication that I'm probably on course. Because the last people that I would want to go to for any moral assessment is you. Your opinion doesn't concern me. Your power concerns me. You could hurt me. And therefore, I'm worried about what you think, not because I hold it in high regard, but your thoughts might lead to your actions. And if those actions are detrimental to me, I ought to beware. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the politics of Shanda. That's what Shanda is. It's a Shanda for the Goyim. It's part of the term. It's a shame. It's a scandal. Shh. They shouldn't see. They shouldn't see. Because if they see, we die. Don't hang your dirty, don't let them see. Now, it's in our DNA. It is. It's one of the reasons why we actually think that Israel's primary challenge is public relations, not policy. That is a very diasporic way of thinking. Public relations, because it's all public relations, everything. What are they going to say? Because as Jews, we're worried about what they're going to say. And guess why we're worried? For good cause. As they say, just because I'm paranoid, it doesn't mean the world really doesn't hate me. It could very well be. If there's anybody in the world who has a right to be paranoid, ladies and gentlemen, that's us. And it's not psychological distortion we didn't get it. We got it very, very clearly. Shanda says, worry about what they're going to say, worry about the way they perceive you, because they have the power. If Zionism stands for anything, it's for the removal of the politics of Shanda. The essence of what Israel stands for, the essence of the Zionist revolution, is that we want to be strong enough not to have to worry all the time about what they're going to think about us, because we are strong enough to defend ourselves. I don't have to walk around cowering all the time. What are the Goyim going to say? Do they like me? The normalcy that Israelis yearned for in its deepest sense was that I want to be just like everybody else. I'm going to be sometimes good, sometimes bad, but I'm not going to walk around feeling that I'm walking on eggs all the time and that somebody's going to be there. And you know what? You don't like me? Sue me. I have an army. And America's not always right. And England is not always right. And Canada doesn't always. Canada's actually always right. Truthfully, I can't remember when Canada was wrong. I got to tell you. But other than Canada, which country's always right? Nobody. Nobody. And I accept it. And part of what Zionism wants to tell Israelis, even to tell you, that's what it is. I don't have to pretend that I'm always right. I can make mistakes. And I'm not worried that everybody's going to pounce on me. I want a strong army. I want a strong economy. So I could stand tall. Tall. And be a nation like every other nation. I don't want to be motivated by the politics of Shanda anymore. Now, one of the things for which Israel, amongst some, doesn't get enough credit is how much the politics of Shanda has also left, to some degree, North American Jewish life, more in the United States than in Canada. We feel proud as Jews. Now, we still worry, and we still look at the newspaper. But for example, a beautiful institution such as AIPAC would be impossible if the politics of Shanda dominated our consciousness. And by the way, so too with an institution such as J Street. Neither institution, for different reasons, would be possible. AIPAC functions under the narrative that we Jews are what? What is the fundamental narrative of AIPAC? We Jews are? No. We are Americans. And I could stand up for Israel just like the NRA could stand up for their stupid guns, and nobody is going to and you know what? You don't like it? That's just fine. Guess where I am? I'm in America. And in America, that's what a citizen gets to do. And if I think that supporting Israel is what I want to do as an American, I'm allowed to do it regardless of what you think. And I'm not worried about anybody claiming dual loyalty. Guess what? Because I'm an American. I don't worry about what you think about me. Because by being an American, I get to do what Americans do. I still look over my shoulder a little bit, but that's what I get to do. When J Street says, I can stand up in the public sphere and speak about the Israel that I want and criticize the policy of an Israeli government when I believe that it is wrong, is not worried about what the Goyim are going to say. They're not. I don't have to worry. I could use my political power. I could talk in the public sphere. I don't have to hide. So much of American Jewish life has followed the lead of Israel. And the new Jew that Zionism created did not just create a new Sabra, it also created a new Jew in North America who feels very good with their power and acts accordingly. Now, even when we do so, no Jew is ever going to be free from the politics of Shanta, and neither are you. Because it's still a dangerous world. And we still, within our DNA, have very strong memories. So we still worry about it a little bit. But it doesn't dominate our consciousness. And more than that, doesn't define much of the politics that we engage in. Much of the politics that we engage in. So if Israel and the current reality of Jewish life, the goal was to relieve us from that debilitating worry about what they're going to say, does that then mean that I don't have to worry about them? They have no role in determining what I ought to do. The only one who should determine what I ought to do is whom? Me. I should decide. I could live in isolation. All of you think you are misreading the Geneva Accord. The Geneva Accord on settlements and the relocation of populations was only for a reality such as Germany, where you're talking about the massive population exchange, not the individual purchase of lands and done by individuals. Nothing like that. Completely different reality. You can't compare the two. Since there was no Palestinian state, and Jordan has relinquished its authority, you are not claiming, you're not reappropriating land, and you make distinctions between land A and land B and land C, etc. And I could sit down and say, let me look at the realities. And I have to do what I think is right. What makes this even more compelling is that today we have a new coalition. On the one hand, we have Jewish power and normalcy, yet we still have enough anti-Semitism in the world, or we certainly have enough anti-Israel sentiment in the world to believe that many people, when they come to think about us, seem to have a screw loose. That when they think about us, they don't think in any way consistently to the way they think about any other conflict in the world. When they come to look at us, we don't know what lenses they're wearing. And it makes us feel like for a Jew, the United Nations is one of the bizarrest places that exist. And it's a morally corrupt place even. There is a sense we look at it with profound moral condemnation. We do. Regardless of what we think about Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, or whatever, Syria is at least equally problematic. At least. And you look at them and you wonder. So when they come and talk to you, or when the European Union is already making statements about how important it is that we ensure that our search for the three boys be done in a, what's the word? In a proportionate manner. Okay, I agree, by the way. I could sit down and say, yes, I agree. I definitely agree. That's a serious, but why are you even talking about this? Like, you had enough time to talk to me about this? No, like, I agree. And one of the most senior officers in the Israeli army was lecturing to our board. He's in charge of all infantry and paratroopers, and says, I have a concern, he says, because I've been teaching my soldiers all the time that one of the key, and this is in the Israeli Code of Ethics, that your use of force has to be proportionate. And it's one of the primary moral considerations of an asymmetrical warfare. And we're teaching our soldiers this all the time. And we're trying to ingrain it in their consciousness over and over again. He says, but if now I'm ordering them to act disproportionately, you think, I'm hurting myself. He says, I know what my standards are. So I have nothing wrong with the thing, but that's all you had time? Like, that you're even aware of something that I'm doing, like that this is even on your radar screen, is screwy. That's a technical term. No, and we feel that way. We as Jews feel that way. Like, we look and we say, it's like, what's wrong with you? They're raping and murdering and massacring in the thousands in Iraq and Syria, and like, you're even worried about my proportionate response in searching for kidnapped teenagers? And I'm not killing people. Okay, there was an accident for which we apologize. And again, I'm not but like, That you even have time to, so like we look at it and part of us say like, a plague on you. A plague on you. Like, who are you? Like, I don't even want to talk to you. No, like deeply you feel it. It's like you feel like aesthetically repulsed. You feel that they're pasnished. They're acting pasnished. What's pasnished? You're acting inappropriately for a human being. Pasnished is just not proper. But not proper in an etiquette sense. It's not proper in a moral sense. So what happens when you sense this? Like over and again. Like again, what aggravates us? Arguments like the circle of violence. Circle of violence is a really problematic category because it doesn't look at who started what. Like it just sort of takes, okay, shit happened, you're responding, and you know, there's a sorry for perpetuating a circle of violence, as if you give up all moral conversation about this or that, and it just sort of, there's a circle and you don't want to be a part of the circle of violence. So get out of the circle of violence, but I wouldn't try to be part of the circle of violence. I left Gaza. No, it doesn't matter, there's a circle of violence. And what these types of, this type of language aggravates us. It aggravates us very deeply, and as a result, we look at many places in the world. Zionism is racism. Israel's an apartheid state. There's certain language that is used against us that creates a sense that there's a world out there who we really don't feel morally a part of. There are a lot of people out there who we don't hold in high moral regard. Or we at least don't believe that they are fair when coming to look at our reality. Now, if somebody's not fair, and I'm now not worried about Shanda, it's like a perfect storm because I don't need to worry about you anymore. Or I'm going to work on myself not to listen to you. But because there are many people out there who we ought not to listen to, and this is a question of who's them, right? Should we listen to them? There's a lot of them who we clearly don't need to listen to. What Indonesia feels right now, or what Sudan votes, or what the leader of human rights, Libya, feels about, literally, what they feel, it's like, knock yourself out. That's the last thing I'm going to do is to read what you're saying. I feel that way. There's a lot of them out there I have no need to listen to. But because there are a lot of thems who I don't need to listen to, does that mean there are no thems who I ought to listen to? Is there no one out there who is somebody who ought to guide my political process? Or ought to, and I want to use now even a more loose term, or a softer term. I'm not talking about even guiding. I'm talking about influencing. Is the meaning of doing Jewish politics to act in a way that you yourself feel is correct? Or is there somebody out there whose opinion of you is relevant in your consideration? I didn't say dominant, it's part of the factor. Are there people out there? And guess what? I could talk about Indonesia, and I could talk about Sudan, and I could talk about Libya. But what about the United States? And what about Canada? And what about England? And what about France? And what about Germany? We do, in fact, have a lot of friends out there. A lot of friends, by the way, which Israel counts on and counts as friends. And I'm not going to get into here the inner American dialogue as to the Islamic roots of Osama bin Laden, delete. I deny it. I'm not going to get into and in some sense I got to tell you, God bless you. You're nuts. You guys are not you per se, you're all the normal ones, but there's so many nutcases out there. Barack Obama, you like him more, you like him less. Come on. Come on. I'm not saying you'd vote more or less. Israel assumes and counts on the President of the United States as our friend. He's our friend. He's certainly somebody who has a moral voice. If he's an anti-Semite, then you need a new category, because you've wasted the category. You've wasted it. Find new ones, because there's certain categories that are very important, and they're really critical ones. And if you use them like this, you need new ones. So if the President of the United States is an anti-Semite, then okay, use that. Then I need a new category for anti-Semite. And again, I'm not getting into American politics. You know, that's not my purpose here. And everybody knows that. You know, you're sort of, let's take a step back and not lose our proportions for a moment. We come, we speak, we talk. There are people who we admit that they have a moral fiber. Values concern them. They care about the state of Israel. They care about Jews. They're not running to do BDS. They're not. So now, are there people out there who, when we do politics, we should take into account? Now, when we take them into account, do we take it into account simply because of Shanda, where we say, listen, they have a lot of power, or is there something deeper? Is it possible that one of the primary goals of an outside voice and an outside set of eyes is to help you understand what's pasnish? That the outside voice is not something that you take into account because you're frightened of reprisal, but you are frightened that when there is no outside voice, you lose the politics of pasnisht. You forget. Because pasnisht has nothing to do with what they think about you. Pasnisht is only about what you think about yourself. Pasnisht is about, that's not what a human being should be. Now, do we need people, friends, who aren't here, who come and look and tell you? They don't even have to tell you. They just look at you and you already feel pasnisht. And when you're by yourself, your own arguments, your own perceptions, your own, not evil inclinations, your good inclinations, not evil, your good inclinations, could cause you to think it's just fine. And you don't feel that it's pasnish. I had this experience, and I didn't talk about it beforehand because we made a covenant with the participants of the program not to speak about this in the press until they did. And they started to. We started here at the Institute a program called MLI, Muslim Leadership Initiative. And the goal of this program over the next 5-6 years is to reach a group of approximately 200 to 300 young American Muslim religious and social activist leaders between the ages of 30 and 40, chaplains or imams in universities, social activists, lawyers, bloggers, business people. And if we could reach 200 to 300 people, we could dramatically alter the Muslim community in North America and the relationship between the Jewish community and the Muslim community. You don't need, if you do change agents, you don't need millions. 200 to 300 spread around the country. The next generation, we're not going to the 60, 70-year-olds. 80% of Muslims in North America are not Arab. Not only are they not Palestinian, they're not Arab. 80% of the Muslims in America are not Arab. Besides being some African American, Indonesian, Pakistani, and Indian, Turks. People who have become firmly American. And again, our narrative is, we have nobody to talk to. It's a very, very interesting exercise to teach Israeli thought, to teach this curriculum to Muslims who've made the decision to come to a Zionist institution and to come to the state of Israel, to try to rethink their narrative about Israel. Now, what do I say to disparage any criticism that they have? They came. And when you sit and talk, and you take them on trips in Israel, and you know that one of the greatest tests that they had, this was their test. Their test was, a group said, we're not coming. Why? Because they said, well, they're not going to take you to the West Bank. And the person said to them, no, it's on the program. And they said, I know it's on the program, but you're going to see when the time comes, it's going to get canceled for security reasons. Not only did it not get canceled, but we set up a day on the West Bank which we didn't run. The Palestinian Authority ran it. And we said there's nothing that they're going to hear that they haven't heard 10 times worse on Al Jazeera. We took them to Hebron. Nothing. No limits. Seeing us, no public relations. Seeing us in our most raw realities, our most troubled realities. And this was not a dialogue program. The program was to invite them to learn about the relationship of Jews to the state of Israel and to sovereignty and to this home. Because it's something that you have never heard. And when you're sitting with this group of people, it so deeply impacted us. Because I had to look at the way you were looking at me. Now we could still disagree. And there was no goal, like we said we're going to plan, let's see what happens. And one of the participants, she ended up writing an article in Time magazine in which she spoke about what an American Muslim learned from an Israeli Zionist institution. And she, by the way, is being castigated. Our Gmail account was hacked into. The inner conversation group, which the group had, was hacked into, exposed, put on social media. Each one of these people are getting life. It's just a very beyond ugly what's going on right now. One of them is a very prominent person. His job is being threatened. And I've been speaking and I said, but we knew. I said, the goal of this program wasn't that you should end up with a very good evaluation and say that you like us. The goal is, it's a marathon. You're now going to have to go back into the Muslim community and talk differently. That was the goal. It's not, and they're willing. Now when I talk to them, do they obligate me? Do they obligate you? Or is it just Shanda? Think about that question. And let's begin to look at a few sources within our tradition which challenge us to think about the role of them when we do politics. One of the most classic sources which argues the opposite, even though it doesn't really, it's just quoted all the time as the paradigmatic source, is the story of Bilam when he is brought to curse the Jewish people. And he gives this iconic blessing. It becomes the iconic blessing as almost the paradigm of what it means to be a Jew, of what the Jewish people are. And he says in source 1, verse 8, "How can I damn whom God has not damned? How doom when the Lord has not doomed? When I see them," that's us, "from the mountaintops, gaze on them from the heights. There is a people that dwells apart, not reckoned amongst the nations." Jews are different. They don't live with other people. They don't do stuff with other people. When you count them, they're different. This, together with chosenness, together with anti-Semitism, together with power, could insulate us and create the greatest ghetto consciousness in Jewish history, ladies and gentlemen. I want you to understand the greatest ghetto consciousness in Jewish history. There is that potential. One of the statements, very often quite prevalent in Israeli society, "Af echad lo yelamed otanu musar." Nobody's going to teach us ethics. Why? Why is nobody going to teach us? Why is it? "Af echad lo yelamed otanu musar." Why is that a default position? Because we died in the Holocaust? Where did we get to a position where by definition we believe that we are morally superior to everybody? Now, I'm not judging on any particular point. It could be that our position on X is distinct from Y might be correct. But a by definition perspective that we have nothing moral to learn from anyone, by what right? Is there some genetic, I know we speak about that there's some priestly genes still floating around somewhere. I know we get all excited about it. Oh, there's really some genetic Jewishness. You know, if it makes you happy, gesund to hate. But do we have a moral gene? Oh, and is there now a new argument between patrilineal and matrilineal descent? Does that moral gene also come down in patrilineal descent? Oh, and conversion, oops, how does they genetically? Girl, come on. We have some genetic morals. Because it's no one, and this is a statement. Af echad lo yelamed otanu musar. Why? Because we're am levadan yishkon. We live alone. You're not going to teach me. You're all anti-Semites. You're all moral Neanderthals, creeps, who I have nothing to learn from. But now look at a fascinating switch that our tradition presents. Deuteronomy chapter 4, the chapter which is introducing the Ten Commandments. And we'll start with verse 5. God says, "See, I have imparted to you laws and rules." This is Moses saying, "See, Moses, I, Moses, have imparted to you laws and rules as the Lord my God has commanded me for you to abide by in the land that you're about to enter and occupy." And then Moses says a remarkable sentence. "Observe them faithfully, for that will be proof of your wisdom and discernment to other peoples, who on hearing of all these laws will say, 'Surely this great nation is a wise and discerning people.'" For what great nation is there that has a God so close at hand as is the Lord your God, is whenever we call upon him? Or what great nation has laws and rules as perfect as all this teaching that I set before you this day? There are two things that are indicative of your specialness. One is your history. And at the time, God was still delivering historically for the Jewish people. God always delivers historically for the Jewish people, in the past and in the future. It's in the present, as you all know, that we sometimes are a little challenged. But we'll leave that aside for now, for when we go back and study the role of God in history. But in the past, in the stories we tell, God loves us always best. Best. So God says, look, everybody's going to look at you, how I cradled you in the desert. No nation says, it's like, it's like thirsty, water. Hungry, food. Which nation got that stuff? We did. Something special. But they say, not only your history, your Torah. Which nation has such a special Torah? Which nation, from its Torah, you could say, look how wise and discerning these people are. Now, this is a remarkable verse. Because I want you to remember, in what context is this verse speaking about? Leaving aside when it was written, we know the context about which it is speaking. We are living in the midst of an idolatrous world who, at the best, are morally corrupt, theologically barbaric. Why would I care what they think about us? Why is that even a relevant condition? If I'm Am Levadad Yishkon, if I'm a nation that lives apart, what do I care? I am a nation that lives apart and I assume they're irrelevant to me. Our Torah says no. Our Torah says that the nations are going to look upon your Torah, and from what you do, from the Torah that you have received, they are going to see something very, very special. And with this section, and a few others, there is a very ambivalent conversation. Are the nations of the world irrelevant to be defeated at the end of days? Or do we realize that we actually want to exist, not coexist with them? We want to exist in a world in which their judgment of us is relevant. Maimonides, over 2,000 years later, takes this verse and creates on the basis of it a fundamentally important principle, connected for him to the core rationality of Judaism. For Maimonides, and this is an important point to remember, for him, the divinity of Torah is directly connected to its rationality. The sign of it being divine is the fact that it's rational. If something is irrational, mysterious, incomprehensible, for the mystic, that's where you find the divine. For Maimonides, that's the antithesis of the divine. For some, you find the divine precisely when you're willing to take a leap of faith. And you leap by way of your faith, using your faith as a springboard over your rationality. For Maimonides, the minute you take that leap, at that moment you're leaving God. Because you don't find God in the irrational. You don't find God in the incomprehensible. It's precisely in the rational that you find God. Now, because of that, and because he believes that rational is universalizable, that means, while some people know more and some people know less, human beings have a capacity to equally understand. Equally understand. Consequently, building on the chapter we just read in Deuteronomy, he says, they are the ones who, if we claim Judaism makes sense, the test as to whether Judaism makes sense is them. And it's only by passing that test that Torah is what? Divine. I want you to understand. That's what it means. Divinity is not judged by miracles. Oh my God, did it really happen at Sinai in the 12th century BCE? And what exactly occurred there? Like, what happened? Did God literally sit on the mountain? Great, I'll buy that. Now tell me what that means. Go on. That's why the big argument about Torah Sinai. Tell me what it meant, God sitting on the mountain. Try to explain it without becoming anthropomorphic. Try to explain it without in some way becoming idolatrous. God doing what? Moses goes up. What happens? God gives Moses a Torah. Actually analyze the movie, and you'll realize its theological complications. What exactly happens? No one has a clue. That's not, and if I could show and argue, that's not what makes it divine. What makes it divine is its content, Maimonides says. What's in it? And he says there are persons who find it difficult to give any reason for any of the commandments and consider it right to assume that the commandments and prohibitions have no rational basis whatsoever. Why? They are led to adopt this theory by a certain disease in their soul, the existence of which they perceive, but they're not even able to discuss. They need therapy. For they imagine that these precepts of our Torah, if they were useful in any respect, were commanded because of usefulness, if that would seem to originate in the thought and reason of some intelligent being. But they don't want an they think that what? We need God. But as things which are not objects of reason and serve no purpose, it's then they undoubtedly are attributed to God. According to the theory of these weak-minded persons, man is more perfect than the Creator. A few sentences down, far be it from this, Maimonides says, on the contrary, the sole object of the law is to benefit us. Thus we explain the scriptural passage for our good always, that he might preserve us alive as it is this day. And again, which shall hear all those statutes, chukim, and those are the supposedly irrational commandments, and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. And Maimonides thus says, he, Moses, thus says that even every one of these statutes convince all the nations of the wisdom and understanding it includes. But if no reason could be found for these statutes, if they produce no advantage and remove no evil, why then should he who believes in them and follow them be wise, reasonable, and so excellent as to raise the admiration of all the nations? For Maimonides, you have to go to the politics of Pasnisht as distinct from Shanda, because it is only in the politics of Pasnisht. It's only then, it's only when there is somebody outside telling you that it's Pasnisht that you are able to live up to the standards that Judaism aspires for itself. And that is to be a rational, moral, religious tradition. A tradition which is a force for good in the world and not a tradition which is a force for evil. And you need somebody. They are your test. Why do I need them as a test? Because by definition, if you don't have an outside critic, you become mediocre. If you don't have an outside person talking to, if you don't have someone who doesn't know your jokes by numbers, and who doesn't assume that you're right from the beginning, you get challenged. And by the way, this is another issue, and I'm not talking about it today. It's one of the reasons why the current reality in North America could either be the greatest moment for the disillusionment of Judaism, the dissolvement, or it could be the catalyst for one of the greatest renaissances in Jewish history. Because now we're going to have Judaism compete with people who don't necessarily assume that that's who they should be and that that's the right religion. When someone on the outside is let in, when you have the courage to say, you judge me, for Maimonides, that is the greatest act of faith. Faith in Torah, faith in yourself, because you need it. You need it. I am deeply concerned about the potential for Israel and the Jewish people as a result of our power with just enough anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiment out there to create a community which speaks to itself and which judges itself. And when I hear Jews talking about whether there is a Palestinian people or not, or debating the legitimacy of settlements, it's at that moment that I feel something is going wrong. And just again, it's very, very possible if somebody says to me the following argument: if we stop building settlements now, the only way Palestinians will ever agree to some ceasefire is if they feel constant pressure. You know what? Okay, that might be a different political universe than mine. And as I said, my goal here is not to talk politics. I can understand the argument. I can understand it. Don't unilaterally do anything because unilateralism in the Middle East is considered weakness and the only way to negotiate a settlement is through strength. Okay, I could talk. What I think my political, it's not the act of voting in Israel is a very strange act. How do you vote when you know that despite everything that you know, you're probably wrong? Welcome to Israeli politics. They're so complicated that even when you have an opinion, you don't really feel comfortable because the other side is also really compelling. It's not simple. Really isn't simple. They really are compelling, and you see it. There's so many other arguments to the other side. But there's one thing when you say, no, the Australian international thinker and this person, and you know that 99%, and okay, take out of those 99%, half who are anti-Semitic, even though you can't say it, even though maybe it's not true. The predominant, that the reading of Geneva Accord means that this is something we shouldn't do. I want to live in a people that obligates me. That's something, and I'm not saying that it's the only factor. I might have other values, and today you're going to hear in your breakout sessions and afterwards from the different values. And at the end, whenever you make a decision, you judge your values. But when we are alone in an intellectual and moral conversation, Maimonides says, beware. Beware. In all probability, the divinity of Torah is being bridged and broken. Breached and broken. Let somebody else into your Beit Midrash. You need non-Jews in your Beit Midrash not to do interfaith dialogue so that they could be tolerant and pluralistic. You need the non-Jew in your Beit Midrash to be your moral critic. It's a tough one. And because not everybody should be allowed in our Beit Midrash, we have a responsibility to at least find somebody who's allowed into our Beit Midrash. And if the only one of them who you allow into the Beit Midrash is the one who always kisses your feet, you haven't used the tool that Judaism is challenging you to open your soul to. And it's a difficult one. But it goes beyond Maimonides to one more idea that I want to share with you, and with that I'll conclude. For those of you who've been studying here for a few years, you now know that this page in Tractate Yoma is one of my most favorite pages. And I try not to let too long pass without going back to it and learning it and rereading it. It's that special a text. The Talmud before this section says that the profanation of God's name is the only sin for which there is no atonement in this life. Every other sin that you do in Judaism, either Yom Kippur, tshuva, or suffering, bring atonement for your sins, with the exception of one sin and one sin only, which you only are atoned for after your death. Death is the only atonement. It's the only condition for atonement. And that is the profanation of God's name. And therefore the rabbis ask, so how do you profane God's name? What causes you to profane God's name? Rav said, if I, a rabbi, take meat from the butcher and do not pay him at once, breathe for a second and let this text enter into your soul and understand what just happened here. You just read a sentence. Okay, a sentence. Meat, butcher, not paying. Okay, it's cute. How sweet. Something just happened here. Rav, one of the greatest rabbis of his time, is saying that I could profane God's name dependent not on whether I behave correctly or incorrectly, but whether people perceive my behavior as correct or incorrect. And Rav is creating here a remarkable revolution in which he is saying, I, the rabbi, who I could say, you know what? I can't profane God's name because me and God, we're like this. We're like, we're buddies. I know what God wants. You know what? Who could judge me? Only a rabbi who's greater than me could judge me. Rav says, I want to open up all rabbinic authorities to the judgment of the non-rabbinic authority. And not only by opening it up to their judgment, but it is through their eyes that potentially I could violate the worst prohibition of all of Torah. When I walk in the world, I have to worry not just merely what I think Torah says, and I can't hold myself in high regard. I have to constantly worry what everybody else thinks about me. The authority, here is the idea. The desecration of God's name creates a switch in which all the authority for this question is now in the hands of everyday people. The question is why? Now, Maimonides says, I need other people because that's the only way that I could discern and make sure that you're living up to the rational principles of your tradition and you're not making excuses for yourself. You're not fooling yourself. You're not doing false logic. Like we have here, in this audience are a number of board members of ours, and one of the beauties of our institute is that my board are my friends. I open up the institute, and when we talk, it's because that's the way we figure out, are we doing what we should be doing or not? Are we doing what we should be doing? So who you open up yourself to? Maimonides says that's the way you discern the rationality. Chilul Hashem makes it even more complicated. And what Chilul Hashem argues, and in many ways, it's based on Genesis chapter 1. We don't have to read it. It's in there for you to read on your own afterwards. But I want you to understand the phenomenal revolution of Genesis chapter 1. God, the transcendent one who exists prior to creation, chooses to create the world. God chooses to be here and to live within this world, and to be the God of this world. Could you desecrate God? No human being could desecrate God. But you can desecrate God's name. Do you know why? Because God yearns to be here. The God who creates the world is a God who invests God's self in this world. It's not Rav who says, I'm exposing myself to the authority of others. It's God who makes that decision. God says, in Maimonides, it is the God, what compels us to listen to them is my search for the rational and to ensure that I don't make a mistake and I don't create something mediocre. under the principle of Chilul Hashem, it's not the search for the rational. It's the search and the obligation to live in a world in which God's name counts for something. God's name means something. And do you know who wants God's name to mean something? God. And that is when Heschel says God in search of man, Heschel is absolutely right. That is what is embedded in the idea of creation. God choosing, I don't want to live alone. What's wrong? You know, if I was God, I wouldn't create a world. I would be the last thing. Especially, I don't want to go, I know it upsets you a little bit. I don't want to go too much back again into read this week's Parsha. Like, what do I need the headache for? I'll play around with the angels. What do I need? You. But God wants us. Why? That's a mystery for which our tradition doesn't give an answer. Why God wants us. But that is a given. That's not an opinion, ladies and gentlemen. It's not, oh, I like that idea. That's a given of our tradition that God wants to be not the God of the heaven. God doesn't want to live in Jerusalem of high. God wants to live here. That theological principle of a God who chooses to leave God's transcendence and live in the midst of the world is a God who says, I'm exposed. I want you. And as a result, what you think is important. Because if I want you to love me, that is the greatest statement of affirmation of you. Because I want your love. And that's why when you act in a world, or in the world in a way that somebody else looks and watches, somebody else is watching, and somebody says, it's pasnished. You've just desecrated God's name. And you have violated the most severe prohibition in all of Jewish law. Second paragraph, third line on the right-hand side. Abaye explained, as it was taught, and you shall love the Lord thy God. Love God. What more theocentric a commandment than love of God? Love of God, forget yourself, forget everything around you. Realize that you're in the presence of the transcendent one. Let God's being, let God's totality engulf your soul and bring you to a new spiritual plateau. That's what love of God means. Feel yourself completely enraptured and taken over by this being. That's not what the rabbis say love of God is. Love of God is never to focus all of one being's on the transcendent. It's the opposite. Abaye says, and you shall love the Lord your God. What does that mean? That means that the name of heaven will become beloved because of you. If someone studies scripture and Mishnah and attends to his disciples, descends to the disciple of the wise, is honest in business, speaks pleasantly to people, what do people then say concerning them? Happy is the father who taught him Torah. Happy is the teacher who taught him Torah. Woe unto people who have not studied Torah. For this man has studied the Torah. Look how fine are his ways, how righteous are his deeds. Of him does scripture say, and thus said unto me, thou art my servant Israel, in whom I will be glorified. But if someone studies scripture and Mishnah, attends on the disciple of the wise, is dishonest in business and discourteous in his relationship with people, what do people say about him? Woe unto him who studied the Torah. Woe unto his father who taught him Torah. Woe unto his teacher who taught him Torah. This man studied the Torah. Look how corrupt are his deeds, how ugly his ways. Of him scripture says, in that men said of them, these are the people of the Lord, and are gone forth out of the land. Now this text, does it just apply to individuals? Or is the meaning of Zionism our recognition that this text also applies to a people and to a community? Forget about Tikkun Olam. Forget about it. We're not there yet. We went too far. Before you get to Tikkun Olam, you ask, are you fulfilling the commandment of love of God? Forget repairing the world. When people look at you, what do they see? Are we as a community open to that consideration? And I know it's a tough one. Because I know there's a lot of people out there who are morally inadequate, to say the least. There are a lot of people out there who aren't fair. And it's very, very human to not want to expose yourself. It's a really human thing. I don't want to be exposed. And in many ways, that's the meaning of a home. In your home, you don't have to worry. You don't have to worry if your pajamas match. You know, in your home, the beauty of a home is where you could relax and feel comfortable. And for so long, we were living in somebody else's house. We were just living in their house, and now we came home. And just leave me alone. Leave me alone. I understand it psychologically, and I am there just as much as everybody else is. Every one of us is there when we see the moral duplicitness. We see it all the time. There are so many reasons why we should not take them into account. But our tradition says that to be a Jew is to push higher. That to be a Jew is not to give in to that feeling. And because there's a lot of people out there who you don't need to listen to, well, I guarantee you there are some people who you do, and your duty is to find them. Find them. Talk with them. And when we talk now about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it's not just about public relations. It's not just about defending ourselves against arguments that people are throwing at us or at our kids on campuses. It's very, very important that we as a people, regardless of whether we believe the Palestinians want peace or don't, or whether we believe peace is possible, that when we sit down and do politics, we talk in this strange move. We talk to ourselves within the prism of a dialogue of a significant other who looks at us. And then, where that'll go is one place. And that will be dependent on your politics. But if we could have a community that aspires for this, that takes the politics of Shanda and understands it, and sets it aside, and transforms the politics of Shanda into a politics of Pasnisht, then we will be at the place where we ought to be. We know that when being in a place where you ought to be doesn't necessarily guarantee you reward and happiness. We know that the righteous very often suffer. But we'll be where we need to be. And I would suggest to you that our being where we need to be is Dayenu. Thank you. And now, any questions or comments, please? I'm just going to see the few hands. I see yourself. Yes, please. We'll start with you.
What did you learn from those Muslims?
I learned that occupation is a problem. And that whether I believe we're occupying a land or not, if it's our land or not, it's a problem. I learned that simply saying, I want peace, but there's nothing that I could do, which is what most of us Israelis say, is not enough. And part of my lecture today is a direct result of that. Or it's part of what I'm putting into I Engage 3 is a direct result of that. Is that I believe that the Jewish people, we might never achieve peace in our lifetime. Ever. But I want to make sure that it's not because we weren't ready. I want to make sure that it's because we were ready. We were thinking. We were maintaining our sense of moral obligation and holding it back, because together with that moral obligation is the obligation to survive as a moral responsibility. But that we didn't let one overcome the other. I heard from them that a lot of the excuses that we make to forgive ourselves for things aren't strong enough, and that we could do better. And they made me feel more Jewish. They made me connect. I became more Jewish and less Israeli. In the sense that I'm connecting deeper to who I want to be. And that my job is to work harder to make Israel into a Jewish state in the largest sense of the term, not in the halachic sense of the term. And the most important thing that I learned from them is that we're not alone. Is that there are really decent people out there. Decent people who might disagree with me politically, who have moral values and moral considerations, who are struggling to become American Muslims, not Middle East Muslims in America, but American Muslims. And that something, they obligate me. And then the last thing I learned is that the future could be better than the present. Could be. If we work on it. Yes, Jerry. Let me just see some hands. I have an idea. I have Jerry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we'll conclude. Okay, we'll see how with time, because we have. Please, Jerry. Some of that you'll hear during lunch today. But what they learned from us, the most important thing that they learned is that the Jewish people's connection to Israel is not a Holocaust phenomenon. Because their classic narrative is that Israel is the ransom that the Christian world paid to Jews because they killed us. It was their ransom, and the money that was paid in the ransom was the Palestinian people. And they never knew about any of the Jewish people's connection to peoplehood, nationhood, sovereignty, land. There's a world that they never ever heard of. And as this person writes in the article, she says, and I blame all the interfaith dialogue, she says. Because when we get together, the only thing we talk about are the things that we already agree on. Oh, let's talk about the relationship between tzedakah and zakat. Oh, that's wonderful. And so we end up talking about nothing. Let's talk about how important it is for us to talk when we're already in the room talking, so we sort of knew that. But let's talk about, and let's come out with a summary on the importance of talking. And she says, no one ever talks about the important issues, and as a result, you've never said anything to me. You've never talked to me. And it was just, it was remarkable. Where it's going to go, I don't know. We'll know in 10 years' time. What? We have hopefully 20 more cohorts. We're starting 2 new cohorts next year. We're doubling the program. But the test of this, again, that's part of being a Jew. My job is to work. My job is that the Jewish people should worry about peace, should recognize our potential to be too utopian about peace, to recognize that some Jews, now I'm connecting it to the opening, just the hints, that some Jews might have imperial peace, and we have to recognize that they speak the same speak, but that they're not talking the same values, and we have to understand it. We have to understand that deep in our souls, there's a potential for Europe, for imperial peace. There's a potential. And that we have to work really hard. And so just like us and just like them, our job is to try to be who we have to be. And God willing, over time, these ideas will take root and will ultimately implement themselves in policies where possible. I have great hope with that, but it's like we're in the game. Whether what the score will be, that you have to be realistic over time. We'll see. I think it was your hand. Yes, please, sir.
If we are to keep ourselves more morally accountable and focus on our own tradition for morality and how we deal with others, and if others are becoming the test of our own morality and the way we need to behave, are we also obligated and or inclined, or should we keep others in their own or towards our own morals so they maintain their own morality?
I lost you at the last sentence.
So is it only the work to do among ourselves, or Jews by Jews,
Or
do we do it with others?
Absolutely do it. In other words, we have a role to be their morally significant others. And I think one of the things that happened in the Holocaust is that Catholicism looked at us and they got embarrassed. They looked at us and said, supersessionist ideology, this is where it leads to. And Jews started to speak to them. And they recognized, and that led to Vatican Council II in '66, where they said, we just have to give up supersessionist ideology. Christianity, living in its own little vacuum, would have had if it wasn't for modernity and it wasn't for Jews, and part of what modernity does, it creates this outsider. And the same thing, by the way, with the relationship with the relationship of all these priests and the stuff and the pedophile stuff that's going. The world looks at you, and then for years you could, it wasn't his fault, and I remember in my yeshiva there was this pedophile. It was an exception. It wasn't this. He really didn't mean it. It's not the same. You didn't understand. The hug didn't really mean a hug, and it was just. You could do all this stuff because it couldn't be that he's doing that. Couldn't be. It could. And it could when someone else looks at you and says, so we have that role too. But I have to, I start with the first one. I want to get you know what? Let me correct myself, because sometimes I tend to be either or-y sometimes in my personality, because I get focused on something and we have to do it. No, it doesn't have to be. Yes, we have that role too. And we have the role to get up in the United Nations and to put a mirror at them. And we have to not stop that either, even though it's lonely. And so it's to create that moral universe is to create the possibility of recognizing that there's somebody else who you have to be open to their judging you on both sides. So yes, thank you. Yes, please, and then yourself. Yes.
In this transformation of the political process from Shamgar to Passage, how do we deal with values such as the chosen people or Israel as a light unto the nation?
They're very, very different statements. Chosen people and light unto the nations. Light unto the nations is the light part of chosenness. There's a dark side of chosenness, which is pasnished. With that, right? We all know what it is. Oh, you want me more? No, there's another part of chosenness which assumes your own superiority, which assumes that you could care more about yourself, that assumes that God loves you best. All that stuff of chosenness is the problematic side. When you take chosenness to believe that you have a mission to the world, which means that chosenness doesn't embody you with superiority but gives you a responsibility, etc., then chosenness could become a force for good. So chosenness itself could be pasnished, and it has that potential. Our job is there too, to find those dimensions of. Some people believe let's get rid of chosenness. I think they're making a mistake. I think chosenness has within it a great potential, but not to create superiority, but to create responsibility. But that itself is a struggle. Yes, sir. And then in order that I saw the hands. Yes, please.
I grew up in a small town of 50 close Jewish families after the war, and Shanda for the Goyim was an operative phrase. We had no Jewish adulterers or thieves, even though we did. The other operative phrase was the kinahora, which I think I first heard at my bris. How does that phrase fit in with, and of course the Goy Shekaf, which is why...
So kinahora is like, the idea of kinahora, it's a whole other one. It's the Jewish attempt to find or to help establish some order in a chaotic universe. That actually, it's actually funny that we actually believe in an evil eye. You know, it's like, I'm not superstitious at all. I have no superstition in my soul. I love God and believe in God, but I don't believe in a God who shapes history. I believe human beings shape history. But I don't argue with an ayin hara. I don't have petitional prayer. I don't ask God for things. But you don't talk about this. You know, it's like I have a completely rational universe, almost. So that's the ayin hara. Is like, you know, Jews. It's like so funny. Like a Jewish people who just come out of the Holocaust worried about an ayin hara. You know, it's like there's something funny about it. Maybe it's like as if there's like if I don't say, it's like okay, I'm safe. Yeah, it's like and then we knock wood because Christ was crucified on the wood. So there's the whole story about the Kenai Hara is quite interesting. But it was also you know. It's the beauty of it is that we are a rational, powerful people working in the world, using all its forces, but we play it safe. That's the Canaan. Yes, please, sir.
I'd like to know how you interpret, going back to Deuteronomy, 3rd line. You saw with your own eyes what the Lord did in the Baal Peor. The Lord your God wiped out from among you every person who followed Baal Peor, while you who held fast to the Lord your God.
Oh, how do I understand that? Yes. Great. That is, it's a verse that repeats itself over and over again in the Ten Commandments, in the Bible, similar to, I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt, you shall have no other gods besides me. God's core educational methodology in the Bible was fear. Was the use of force and miracles to intimidate people either into following God or into believing that we owe something to God.
This sounds like they get killed if they don't believe in our God.
This is not that it doesn't sound, it is. This is and I think one of the important things is not to there is a whole educational methodology of the Bible. But one of the interesting things, now the question is how you read it. One way of reading the methodology of the Bible is, okay, what they're telling you is that religious language is about fear and punishment, and that's what religion is. That's one reading of it. A colleague of mine, a number of years ago, taught me a different reading. And it is the absolute failure of this methodology. Because God huffs and puffs and doesn't blow the Jewish people down. Doesn't get anywhere. From all of God's huffing, nobody gets too impressed. It's a fascinating, in other words, if you look at this whole book of this whole Numbers, the whole Bible, it's just like, it's like, you think, because some people read it, say, that's what it is. Religion is about fear. The Bible is about the failure of fear to motivate faith. It's like you could switch it. Who's right doesn't matter. I like the second one, so I'm going with it. It's not about being right. No, it's like it's good for, I'm not making, it's like, so this verse is absolutely, you want to live? Follow me. And you know, it's like, this is not subtle. This is all over the place in the Bible. But that doesn't work. And Jewish history teaches us that the Jewish people started to become committed to Judaism precisely when God stops huffing. I don't know if, you know, didn't soften it. You know what softened it? The present. Reality. God's not huffing. Rome is huffing. God's not present. And we had to start, instead of thinking about, oh, do I owe God? We had to start thinking about, what is this tradition? Who do I want to be? Stop blowing so much. Give me some room to think for a moment. You know, it's like parents sometimes. It's like we're trying to shut up for a moment. I heard you. Now let me think for a moment. And that's basically what happened. When God stopped huffing, the Jewish people sat down and said, you know what? Maybe there's something here. Maybe I. No, it was like just that's. So this verse, in fact, expresses that very, very much. And then a new conversation. The conversation that I'm talking about, and with this I'll conclude, and I for other questions if you'd like to come talk afterwards. Talk for us. It's like, it's not about what God wants, and it's not about getting it, you know, following. It's about sitting down and asking, what does it mean to be a Jew? And what it means to be a Jew is to believe that this Torah has to live up to the highest standard of decency, morality, and rationality. That's what it means to be a Jew. And as our lives continue, and as life continues, and as challenges face you, what do you have to do in order to fulfill that? Nothing more and nothing less. And the question that I'm posing to you today is it valuable for you to have somebody out there, not to curtail you, but to help you fulfill who you want to be? And I believe that our tradition tells you that you need such a people. And as you think about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, find those people. Find them. Talk to them. Not because you want them to like you, but because you want to like yourself. Thank you very, very much. A Jewish state with safe and defensible borders. That statement is about as parav and broad as you could make, outside of a few small settlements somewhere. Most Jews, yeah, that sounds right. I didn't say we should do it. I didn't say we can do it. I said, and this is, by the way, Netanyahu's core policy. It's the core policy of the government of Israel, even though some parties, such as, for example, the National Religious Party, now called the Jewish Home, says, do you know what? I don't mind that you feel that way. I could sit in a government even though I don't feel that way, because your feeling that way has already stated a condition that will never be implemented, and therefore I don't have to lose any sleep. Because you yourself said that you're committed to a two-state solution so long as it could coincide with the legitimate rights of a Jewish people to live as a Jewish state with clear and with defensible borders. You're not going to be able to do that. So even though I would never articulate that, because I believe that we shouldn't have a Palestinian state, so says the Jewish Home, but since you have a condition for its implementation, which I don't assume is going to happen anywhere within my political career, there's no reason why my political career and your political career in the present can't sit with each other. And that's the basis of the current coalition. Right? But we asked ourselves, our research team, our iEngage research team, and we're working on iEngage, the third section of iEngage now, which deals with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And how do we talk about it? And how do we create space within the American Jewish community and also within Israel to talk about this, despite our political differences? We asked if the value is a two-state solution, or if rather the goal is a two-state solution, what values do we bring to the table to infuse our thinking? Like why? What are the Jewish and general values that guide our political theory? And again, I restate it over and again. Just assume that this is like somebody massaging you a little bit. Because I know for some people, every time I say something, like there could be a little jump. So I'm just saying, shh, still. It's another Yiddish word that I know. Still, it's okay. I'm not arguing with you. I'm not delegitimizing anybody's political positions here. Quite to the contrary. What I'm trying to do is to create a language where Jews could actually respect each other and talk to each other despite our values, our political disagreements. That we could all aspire to hold on to certain core values which elevate our aspirations all the while knowing that it's possible that in the present, life might be difficult term. It's a shame. It's a scandal. Shh. They shouldn't see. They shouldn't see. Because if they see, we die. Don't hang your dirty, don't let them see. Now, it's in our DNA. It is. It's one of the reasons why we actually think that Israel's primary challenge is public relations, not policy. That is a very diasporic way of thinking. Public relations, because it's all public relations, everything. What are they going to say? Because as Jews, we're worried about what they're going to say. And guess why we're worried? For good cause. As they say, just because I'm paranoid, it doesn't mean the world really doesn't hate me. It could very well be. If there's anybody in the world who has a right to be paranoid, ladies and gentlemen, that's us. And it's not psychological distortion we didn't get it. We got it very, very clearly. Shanda says, worry about what they're going to say, worry about the way they perceive you, because they have the power. If Zionism stands for anything, it's for the removal of the politics of Shanda. The essence of what Israel stands for, the essence of the Zionist revolution, is that we want to be strong enough not to have to worry all the time about what they're going to think about us, because we are strong enough to defend ourselves. I don't have to walk around cowering all the time. What are the goyim going to say? Do they like me? The normalcy that Israelis yearned for in its deepest sense was that. I want to be just like everybody else. I'm going to be sometimes good, sometimes bad, but I'm not going to walk around feeling that I'm walking on eggs all the time and that somebody's going to be there. And you know what? You don't like me? Sue me. I have an army. And America's not always right. And England is not always right. And Canada doesn't always. Canada's actually always right. Truthfully, I can't remember when Canada was wrong. I got to tell you. But other than Canada, which country's always right? Nobody. Nobody. And I accept it. Good morning, everyone. Boker Tov, good morning. I hope you had a very pleasant and joyful Shabbat. I did. Who here speaks Yiddish? Abyssal. Who here understands a little Yiddish? Okay. So that's more than me, but I know about 4 or 5 words. I know about 4 or 5 words, but the words that I know are really important. Some of them are really important because those are the words that my parents didn't want us to understand. Yiddish was their secret language. I think it's sort of the rule of survival when you have 5 children. You need a secret language. But some of those words are just unbelievably deep and important words to understand Jewish consciousness, to understand the way we think, to understand some of the ideas that motivate us. Today's lecture was formerly entitled Jewish Values in the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict, the Jew in the World. In reality, today is going to be about the politics of Shanda versus the politics of Pasnisht. Now, Who here knows what pasnish, what shanda means? That's very interesting that you all know that term. And I'm going to argue that that's not an accident. Because Jews know very well the politics of shanda. Now, the issue I want to talk about today, and actually it's going to be the theme for the whole day, for also your other sessions this afternoon, is what are the key values that can or should motivate a Jewish political theory vis-a-vis the Palestinian-Israeli conflict? In particular, we're asking the following question. If, let's say, as of a few months ago, and we don't know if it's still that way, but let's say, the majority of Jews in Israel, and certainly the majority of Jews in North America, are for a two-state solution, if it's possible, within the context of Israel's legitimate rights to live as a... Now, the question that I want to ask is, I believe, one of the hardest questions, and one that I have to massage you a lot on. Like, relax, don't worry, but come with me for a while. I want to ask the question, should they influence the way we think? I'll get there. I already are. Don't worry. Who's they? Is there a they? Is there a them? Is there a them who we should take into account when we think about our political theories? When we think about who we want to be? Now I'm going to get it now. Get ready, sit comfortably. If, and this is checked, if 99% of legal theorists in the world and scholars of international law believe that settlements are illegal, is that relevant data? Is it relevant data? Like, or if we find ourselves that we are quoting the one Australian person who we met, and there's an Australian, we know somebody, and he says that it's not. And it all comes down to a fundamental argument on how you read the Geneva Accord, on what are the fundamental rules of how an occupying force is supposed to treat, whether it's occupying land or occupying people. Or what happens if you find yourself inclined to being one of the few people in the world who's giving a very emotional argument? There is no Palestinian people. No Palestinian people. And you might have lots of data. You could start piling it up. And if everybody looks at you and has some borderline double take, because they frankly don't know what you're talking about, and then they get even a little more, because aren't some people claiming that you're not a people? Or didn't they claim you're not? And like, you're now doing what? There is no Palestinian people. And you will show that in this accord and in this accord they were speaking about the Arab Israelis and they weren't talking about the Palestinians, and there wasn't the Palestinians, and the Palestinians only really became a people when copying Zion. Whatever, knock yourself out. You speak, and certainly when you speak in the context of certain Jewish audiences, you could feel really normal. But what happens when somebody is looking at you and they look at you and say, something's wrong? What happens when you hold a position, let's say, forget not just on settlements, on settlement expansions now, or in the context of a certain peace negotiation, or don't even call it a peace negotiation, that might be too value-laden, in a certain negotiation leading to who knows what. You do A, B, and C. And when you speak to yourself, it's clear to you, of course I could do A, B, C, and D. But most people look at you and think that you're crazy. Think that you're wrong. Should that affect our thinking? My question is, how ought the world affect the way we Jews do politics? Now let's talk about why this is such a difficult question. See, when the world hates us, there's only one thing I'm worried about, and that is their power. What I'm not worried about is their opinion. And for 2,000 years, we weren't worried about their opinion because we didn't hold them in high moral regard. You are an immoral anti-Semitic creep. Nothing more and nothing less. If you actually don't like me, that's a pretty good symptom, indication that I'm probably on course. Because the last people that I would want to go to for any moral assessment is you. Your opinion doesn't concern me. Your power concerns me. You could hurt me. And therefore, I'm worried about what you think, not because I hold it in high regard, but your thoughts might lead to your actions. And if those actions are detrimental to me, I ought to beware. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the politics of Shanda. That's what Shanda is. It's a Shanda for the Goyim. It's part of the